Well, it's good to see all of you here. I appreciate you coming. I know it's cold outside, so I guess it's good to sit inside and warm up a little bit and talk about some policies and things. And I appreciate Lake Area Tech having us today. And that's one of the reasons that we had at the end of the year, what the media, what everyone was talking about, was this combination of all of these tax rates that were expiring, and taxes were going up in so many different areas. We got to the end of December, and all of these tax rates were expiring, and all of them were going up, leading to a situation where we would have a new recession, we'd have higher unemployment, and it was a really bad, tough situation to be in. Because of this, and because of all of these tax rates going up, was that we could see a drop in economic output and also an unemployment rate that would climb. As more and more people become unemployed because businesses have had to retract and lay people off, that makes them sign up more for government programs that they need to get through difficult times. And also what it did was it protected 98% of our small businesses in the state as well. I ended up supporting the bill because of the changes that it made to tax code, and it locked in lower rates for those 99% of South Dakotans. It also moved the death tax to a $5 million exemption and lowered the rate to 40%. But beyond that, it also had a year-long farm bill extension in it. We worked on a farm bill and put together a bill that I thought was really solid and had some good reforms in it, but we couldn't get it passed and put together last year. Crop insurance gives us predictability that we can have so that we aren't in a situation where we've got a $50 billion disaster bill for agriculture every single year. Crop insurance gives us that and does it in a responsible way. A lot of our seniors live on dividends. So many of them that are depending on Social Security, also the only supplemental income that they have may be a small dividend payment that they have from a co-op or from a different investment that they might have had that brings in a couple $100 to them a year. The blue part of what you're seeing on this graph is the president's tax increases that he just recently got implemented. Let's say you were making $46,000 a year in your house. You're spending, if you lived and acted like the government did, you'd be spending $72,000 a year. That means you'd be going $26,000 a year into debt, putting it on credit cards so that you can live, and that your family right then would have $296,000 in debt and credit card debt just to live. I don't know of anybody that lives like this, but for some reason there's a lot of people in this country that defend the fact that the government lives like this. If you look at what's going on here, discretionary spending is a very small part of what's actually being spent by the federal government. Mandatory spending is all the spending that the government does that's on autopilot, which means it's set in law through a formula that Congress never votes on. 2010, we've jumped to 62% of it. And that projected into 2040, 76% of our federal government spending isn't accountable to elected officials at all. Each of us is saddled with about $50,000 worth of debt. Republicans have overspent, Democrats have overspent. What's astounding to me is how quickly we're accumulating debt now. When you look at the fact it took 232 years to accumulate $6.3 trillion of debt, and look at how much was able to be accumulated in the last 4 years. If you're in business, you recognize that your ability to pay your bills a lot of times can have to do with interest rates. Obviously, the more in debt that we are and the higher our interest rates go, the more difficult it becomes for us to even service that debt. What's changed dramatically over the past several decades is who owns our debt. You know, back when you look at the 1970s, a lot of our debt was owned by Americans. They sold treasury bonds, and Americans purchased that, and it was only 5% of it was owned by other countries. But things change over time. You can see that in 1990, 19% of our debt became in the hands of foreign countries. But look at the situation we're in today. 47% of our debt is held by foreign countries. Right now, we have a 35% higher debt ratio than each individual does in Greece. Look at a lot of the programs that we have. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all very valuable programs that a lot of people depend on, and people ask me all the time why they're not cash flowing like they did in the past. What has changed to these programs? Why do they need to be reformed? Why are they going bankrupt, and what is necessary to change them? Just looking at some of the facts of these programs, if you look back in the 1950s, for every one person who was receiving benefits from Social Security, we had 16 workers that were paying into that program. They were paying those taxes into Social Security for every person that was drawing out. Today, we have 2. And as you can see from the chart on the right, that we are living much longer than we used to. So we really do need to reform the program before we get to the point where we have a 65-year-old who goes to sign up for the program and there's nothing there to pay the benefits out. Some of the things that we've been able to do in the House that have been positives that we've been able to accomplish has been cutting the discretionary spending like I talked about 2 years in a row, which was the first time since World War II. Regulations has been a real threat to us, especially with our lives here in South Dakota. I got a lot of help from people in this area of the state on the dust regulation bill. The EPA has been the biggest enemy of agriculture that we've seen in a long time. And the fact that we were able to push them back on a lot of the dust regulations that they were going to move forward with, which would have jeopardized our ability to harvest, to bale hay, to even handle our gravel roads in the summertime on a dry day, really brought us some relief from changing our way of life. We have to be on guard with these agencies and departments and make sure that they understand the real consequences of some of the agenda that they're pushing that's not based on scientific fact or even necessity. The RAINS Act says, it was a bill that came through the House that said, these departments and agencies couldn't put a regulation in place that was economically significant, so had more than a $100 million impact on our economy, unless it came through Congress first. And we're the ones that are elected and accountable to people. We're the ones who come back home and hear from you and have to stand in front of you and hold us accountable. And if they're going to pass a regulation that's that significant, then we should have to vote on it before they can do it. We need to reduce our spending, but what the House did several months ago is that we passed a bill that replaced those across-the-board cuts with targeted cuts in other areas that we felt would be much more appropriate, but still make sure that we can defend our country. We voted on a bill that you maybe have heard about. It's called the No Budget, No Pay Act. We put it together in the House and we passed it that said if the Senate does not pass a budget, they don't get paid. Their job is to do a budget. We need to make sure that we get this done and hold that body accountable to doing their jobs. And these are just some examples of how long it has been since they have actually done a budget. Most of the people in this state recognize that we have a unique ability in South Dakota to work together. That Republicans and Democrats in South Dakota aren't all that different most of the time.
House of Representatives has passed a lot of bills, but the Senate doesn't do anything. So isn't it a do-nothing Senate?
Well, yes, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. I think a lot of times because we get wrapped into Congress is because we're called congressmen and congresswomen. Everybody automatically assumes it's the House that's wrapped into that. But we have passed more bills and more reforms in the last Congress than has been done in a very long time in Washington, D.C.
The answers from the Hillary Clinton testimony, will we be calling her back? And if so, will the Republicans maybe get together and get their questions more in line with what should have been asked?
You know, I'm hopeful. She came before the Senate committee. She hasn't been before the House committee yet. Hopefully the House will be able to continue to push on that. But yeah, we were all pretty disappointed by the hearing that took place in the Senate.
From attaching things that have no meaning to a bill. We attach other things onto it just to get it shoved through.
Well, you're exactly right. Over 80% of the Farm Bill is nutrition. Is nutrition programs, which is food stamps, WIC, school lunch programs. Those are all included in the Farm Bill. It'd be more accurately called a food bill because that would more accurately reflect what's in it. And farmers and ranchers get a bad reputation for what's included in the Farm Bill because everybody looks at the amount of dollars that are included in the Farm Bill and think it's all going to farmers, when over 80% of it's not. And then even in the other 20%, you have a forestry title, you have an energy title. The commodity title is much smaller than that.
Where do we stop all that?
Yeah. It did. It almost, in fact, an amendment that was put onto the Sandy bill on the floor doubled the cost. And that's why I couldn't support that bill when it came up for a final vote. It was because I understand that disasters happen, but when you attach all of this other spending to it that was from years ago or other things that are arbitrarily added to it, you just can't support that kind of spending.
I'd like to get your thoughts on that being on the House Armed Services Committee and what do you think if the Chuck Hagel move is going to be a good one for us, or can he help us?
Well, I'm very concerned about his nomination. I'm concerned about his history and the positions he's taken. I believe we need to firmly support Israel, and he has put forward some statements in the past which indicate that his stance on Israel is questionable. I'm concerned about his history and his willingness to cut spending that could be devastating to our Defense Department and to our military. I think that we can cut spending everywhere in our budget. We have to have that conversation about our defense, but the levels that he's talked about in the past could devastate us.
And for the first time in my life, to express my Second Amendment right, I went out and bought a high-power rifle, because that's my right, I believe, to do that. I'm concerned about my military retirement. Last Friday, I turned 62. Guess what? On March 29th, I'm supposed to start getting Social Security. We'll see what happens for that.
DC, South Dakota has a much higher service rate than any other state.
The Constitution, not the President of the United States.
No, that's a good point.
Civilian employment freeze at Ellsworth and some layoffs. Is this a hint of something happening at Ellsworth?
Well, there was some layoffs at Ellsworth. Some of it was through the financial services mission that was changed within the Air Force, but some of the civilian force was reduced, and they were ones that facilitated a lot of the phone calls for bases all over the country. A lot of the phone calls that came in for other bases were run through personnel that were stationed there at Ellsworth.
Question to you, ma'am, is do you feel that through these talks there will be any ground gained on the pro-life stand? And also, what effect will this have then on the talks of gun control currently going on?
It certainly is a contrast in policies, isn't it? I mean, it certainly is, if we're going to have a discussion about life, that would be a normal conversation to have as well. If it is illegal for them to have that gun, then those reporting requirements should be followed through on. So beyond that, anything else that has been proposed that I've seen, I don't see it really making a big difference in some of these situations unless we have a well-rounded conversation about all of the implications of what we're doing.
To purchase a weapon, you have to show a picture ID. So what are they going to do with this thing really, if they really manage to get this thing pushed through the way they want?
You mean, what are they going to do if people don't have picture IDs to
Right.
purchase guns? Well, they probably would be fine with that. You feel it is that Republicans have caved on.
Well, when the fiscal cliff, I mean, they could force Obama right now to try to make some cuts. He doesn't want to make any spending cuts whatsoever.
Well, let me tell you about my perspective on the fiscal cliff, because I had a front row seat to that train wreck. And what we had done is, because of previous Congresses doing these short-term tax extensions and all of that, and all of them expiring at the end of the year, we have created a situation where the only two options that we had was to let President Obama raise taxes on everybody and get $4 trillion more in his pocket to reach into ours and take it and spend it however he wanted to and blame Republicans for it, or to support the only bill that we had in front of us that was going to protect 99% of South Dakotans. He picked the date, and we took that date away from him. Now we know it's May 18th, we can control that, and we're going to have all these spending conversations, and then he knows on that day, if he hasn't worked with us, what's going to happen.
Week we had 4 new final rules that got passed by the Consumer Protection Finance Bureau in 1 week. 4 of them were passed and finalized, and that's just the tip of the iceberg that's going to come out over the next 6 to 7 months. We're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars just trying to figure out what's in these.
But really what the Dodd-Frank bill did is it endorsed too big to fail. It made the 5 biggest banks even more powerful, and it is wiping out our community banks.
The courts, I heard the court had a ruling just in the last week or something about those 3 appointments. Could you expound a little bit?
Well, there was
Keep it feet to the fire on some of
Yeah.
these things. That's a question.
There was an appeals court which recently came forward with a decision that said that the appointments that President Obama made during recess, when Senate was in recess, he did not have the authority to make.
I have a very strong frustration with the mainstream media in being so absolutely biased. And they have been supporting the person in the administration now. And I hate to say this, but to the detriment of Americans throughout our country. Now, I don't know what we can do about that.
Yes, it has been noticed. There's always different perspectives on the issue. Stay warm. It's going to get cold tomorrow, so we'll see you later.